Most people think growing food requires endless work, hours of watering, constant weeding, and a garden that demands attention every single day. That's one reason so many people never start. They're busy. They have jobs, families, errands, and responsibilities that already fill every hour of the week. The idea of adding a garden to that schedule sounds impossible. But here's the truth. Some vegetables are far easier than others. In fact, some crops are so forgiving that they continue growing even when life gets busy. They tolerate missed watering sessions. They survive beginner mistakes. And they keep producing food with surprisingly little effort. The secret isn't becoming a better gardener. It's choosing smarter plants. Today, we're counting down 15 vegetables that practically grow themselves. These are the crops that reward busy gardeners with fresh food while demanding very little in return. And stay until the end, because the #1 vegetable on this list can continue producing harvests for years after a single planting. Let's get started. At number 15, we have green onions. If there were a perfect vegetable for busy gardeners, green onions would be near the top of the list. Why? Because they seem determined to survive. Most vegetables require careful planning, seed starting, and ongoing attention. Green onions can literally be grown from scraps you were about to throw away. Take the white root ends from a bunch of store-bought green onions, place them in water, and within days, you'll see fresh green growth appearing. It's one of the fastest gardening wins you'll ever experience. But what makes green onions truly valuable isn't their speed, it's their resilience. Miss a watering? They usually recover. Forget about them for a few days? They keep growing. Harvest heavily? New leaves quickly replace the old ones. And because they grow vertically, they take up very little space. A simple container on a balcony or patio can produce fresh green onions for months. They're also incredibly useful in the kitchen. Eggs, soups, salads, stir-fries, baked potatoes, sandwiches. A little fresh green onion improves almost everything. Busy gardeners love crops that provide frequent rewards, and green onions do exactly that. Instead of waiting months for a harvest, you're often harvesting within weeks. And every time you snip a handful of fresh greens for dinner, you'll wonder why more people don't grow them. At number 14, we have bush beans. Some vegetables seem to punish every mistake. Bush beans aren't one of them. That's one reason they're such a favorite among busy gardeners. Unlike pole beans, bush beans don't require elaborate trellises or complicated support systems. You simply plant them, water them during establishment, and let them do their thing. Before long, they're covered with flowers, then pods, then more pods, and suddenly, you're harvesting handful after handful of fresh beans. What makes bush beans especially attractive is how quickly they produce. Many varieties begin harvesting in around 50 to 60 days. That's fast enough to keep gardeners motivated, but long enough to produce substantial harvests. They're also surprisingly productive for the amount of effort involved. A relatively small planting can generate enough beans for multiple meals. And because the plants stay compact, they're perfect for raised beds, containers, and small suburban gardens. Busy gardeners don't need crops that demand constant attention. They need crops that quietly handle business on their own. Bush beans do exactly that. They're reliable, they're productive, and they're one of the easiest ways to fill a basket with homegrown food. At number 13, we have Swiss chard. If vegetables had personality types, Swiss chard would be the easygoing friend who never complains. Too hot? No problem. A little cold? Still growing. Forgot to harvest last week? It'll be waiting. That's why so many experienced gardeners consider Swiss chard one of the most dependable vegetables in the entire garden. Unlike lettuce, which often struggles during summer heat, Swiss chard keeps producing long after temperatures start climbing. The colorful stems make it beautiful enough for ornamental gardens, but its real value comes from production. One planting can provide harvest after harvest for months. Simply remove the outer leaves and allow the center to continue growing. New leaves appear, then more leaves, then more. It's a cycle that seems to continue indefinitely. Busy gardeners appreciate plants that don't require constant replanting. Swiss chard fits that description perfectly. Instead of starting new crops every few weeks, you can often rely on the same plants throughout an entire season. And because the leaves can be harvested at different sizes, you always have flexibility. Need baby greens? Harvest early. Need larger leaves for cooking? Wait a little longer. Either way, the plant keeps producing. Few vegetables give so much while asking so little. At number 12, we have kale. Few vegetables have earned a reputation for toughness, quite like kale. This is the vegetable that seems almost offended by difficult conditions. Cold weather arrives, kale keeps growing. Light frost appears. Kale often tastes even better. Weather becomes unpredictable, kale adapts. That's exactly why busy gardeners love it. The less a plant complains, the easier life becomes. And kale rarely complains. Once established, it requires surprisingly little attention. Harvest the outer leaves, leave the center intact, and fresh growth continues appearing throughout the season. This cut-and-come-again system means a single planting can provide food for months. Many gardeners are shocked by how productive kale becomes over time. What starts as a tiny seedling eventually turns into a reliable source of greens that seems determined to keep producing. It's also one of the most nutritious vegetables you can grow. Yet despite all those benefits, its greatest strength may be reliability. Busy gardeners don't need perfect plants. They need dependable plants. And few vegetables are more dependable than kale. At number 11, we have okra. The hotter it gets, the happier this vegetable becomes. While many garden crops begin struggling during the peak of summer, okra seems to view extreme heat as an invitation to grow faster. That's one reason it's so valuable for busy gardeners. Summer is often the busiest time of year. Vacations happen. Schedules get packed. People spend less time managing their gardens. Okra doesn't mind. In fact, once established, it's surprisingly drought-tolerant. It develops deep roots that help it handle dry periods far better than many vegetables. Miss a watering session? Okra usually shrugs it off. Temperatures climb past 90 degrees? Okra accelerates. But perhaps its biggest advantage is productivity. When harvesting begins, plants often continue producing for weeks or even months. The more regularly you harvest, the more pods appear. It's almost like the plant rewards you for picking from it. And because insects and diseases tend to cause fewer problems than with some other vegetables, maintenance remains relatively low. For busy gardeners living in warm climates, okra can feel almost effortless. Plant it, give it sunshine, harvest often, and let nature do most of the work. At number 10, we have Malabar spinach. Most people assume all spinach struggles when summer arrives. Traditional spinach certainly does. As temperatures rise, it often bolts, turns bitter, and quickly fades away. Malabar spinach is different. In fact, it isn't true spinach at all. It's a vigorous climbing vine that seems to thrive when the weather becomes hot and humid. That's exactly why busy gardeners love it. While other leafy greens are giving up, Malabar spinach is just getting started. Once established, it grows rapidly, climbing trellises, fences, cages, and supports with very little encouragement. The leaves are thick, glossy, and productive. And unlike many vegetables that offer a short harvest window, Malabar spinach can keep producing for months. Simply harvest the young leaves and tender shoots, and the plant responds by producing even more growth. Another advantage is its ability to tolerate occasional neglect. Miss a watering here and there, and it often recovers quickly. Busy gardeners don't need vegetables that demand perfection. They need vegetables that cooperate with real life. Malabar spinach does exactly that. By the middle of summer, a single plant can transform a small trellis into a wall of edible greenery. And while other gardeners are replanting crops that failed in the heat, you're still harvesting fresh leaves from the same plant. At number 9, we have cherry tomatoes. If you've ever struggled to grow large slicing tomatoes, don't worry, you're not alone. Many gardeners discover that cherry tomatoes are far more forgiving. That's why they're often recommended to beginners and busy gardeners alike. Cherry tomato plants tend to grow faster, produce earlier, and continue yielding fruit long after larger varieties have slowed down. Some plants can produce well over 100 tomatoes in a single season. That's an incredible return for relatively little effort. Once established, the biggest job is simply harvesting the fruit before it overwhelms the plant. And that's not much of a problem to have. Another reason busy gardeners love cherry tomatoes is consistency. Larger tomatoes can crack, develop disease problems, or struggle during temperature swings. Cherry tomatoes often handle those challenges better. A simple container on a sunny patio can provide a steady supply of fruit for months. Every trip outside becomes an opportunity to grab a handful of sweet, fresh tomatoes. And because they're perfect for snacking, salads, and cooking, they rarely go to waste. Busy gardeners appreciate crops that reward them frequently, and cherry tomatoes deliver exactly that. At number 8, we have sweet potatoes. Most people grow sweet potatoes for the roots hidden underground, but that's only part of the story. What makes sweet potatoes such a great choice for busy gardeners is their ability to thrive under less than perfect conditions. Once established, they're surprisingly drought-tolerant. Their vigorous vines spread quickly, covering soil and helping reduce weeds along the way. That's less work for you. And less work is exactly what this list is all about. Throughout the growing season, the plants quietly do their job. They don't demand constant pruning. They don't require daily attention. They simply grow. Then, months later, they reward you with a harvest that often exceeds expectations. A small planting can produce an impressive number of sweet potatoes. In many regions, they're among the easiest, calorie-rich crops a gardener can grow. And even the leaves are edible. That's a bonus many people never realize. Busy gardeners don't always have time to babysit delicate plants. Sweet potatoes understand that. They grow steadily, tolerate mistakes, and deliver a substantial harvest without making life more complicated. At number 7, we have collard greens. Some vegetables are fragile. Collard greens are not. These plants have earned a reputation for toughness that few vegetables can match. Heat? They handle it. Cool weather? They handle that too. In fact, many gardeners grow collards because they're one of the most dependable leafy greens available. Once established, they continue producing large, nutritious leaves for months. The harvesting process couldn't be simpler. Remove the lower leaves as needed and allow the center to keep growing. New leaves replace old ones, creating a steady supply of food throughout the season. Busy gardeners love that kind of reliability. Instead of constantly replanting, they can focus on harvesting. Another advantage is resilience. Collards often recover from problems that would seriously damage more delicate crops. They tolerate changing weather conditions and continue producing long after many greens have stopped. That's why they remain a staple in countless home gardens. If your schedule doesn't allow constant garden maintenance, collard greens are happy to carry some of the workload themselves. At number 6, we have zucchini. If there were an award for the most generous vegetable, zucchini would be a strong contender. Gardeners joke about locking their car doors during zucchini season because they're afraid someone might leave extra zucchini inside. That joke exists for a reason. These plants are incredibly productive. One healthy zucchini plant can produce 20, 30, or even 40 fruits during a season. That's a remarkable amount of food from a single plant. And despite that productivity, the maintenance requirements remain surprisingly low. Give zucchini plenty of sunlight, reasonable watering, and enough room to grow, and it often takes care of the rest. The plant grows quickly, flowers heavily, and begins producing harvests sooner than many gardeners expect. Another reason busy gardeners appreciate zucchini is efficiency. You don't need a large garden to see results. Even a few plants can generate more food than many families can eat fresh. And because the harvest arrives steadily over time, there's always something to pick. While some vegetables make you work hard for every harvest, zucchini seems determined to overwhelm you with success. And for busy gardeners, that's exactly the kind of problem worth having. At number 5, we have rosemary. Now technically, rosemary is an herb rather than a vegetable, but it earns a place on this list because few edible plants are easier to grow. In fact, many gardeners spend more time worrying about rosemary than rosemary spends worrying about itself. Once established, this Mediterranean plant thrives on neglect. It loves sunshine. It tolerates drought, and it actually prefers soil that isn't overly rich. That's great news for busy gardeners because it means less maintenance, less watering, and fewer problems overall. Miss a watering? Rosemary usually doesn't care. Forget to fertilize? It keeps growing. While many plants constantly ask for attention, rosemary quietly handles business on its own. And because it's a perennial in many climates, one planting can continue producing for years. Imagine stepping outside anytime you need fresh herbs for roasted vegetables, grilled chicken, soups, or homemade bread. That's the convenience rosemary provides. Busy gardeners don't just need productive plants, they need reliable plants. And rosemary may be one of the most reliable edible plants you can grow. At number 4, we have mint. If you've ever grown mint before, you already know why it's so high on this list. Most gardeners don't spend their time trying to keep mint alive. They spend their time trying to keep it under control. That's because mint is one of the most vigorous edible plants you'll ever grow. Give it a container, a little water, and some sunlight, and it often takes off like a rocket. In fact, many experts recommend growing mint in pots specifically to prevent it from spreading too far. That's the kind of problem busy gardeners love. Instead of worrying about whether the plant will survive, you're managing how much it grows. Fresh mint can be harvested repeatedly throughout the season. Tea, desserts, fruit salads, drinks, sauces. The uses seem endless. And because the plant recovers so quickly after harvesting, you'll rarely run out. Another reason mint belongs near the top of this list is forgiveness. Forget a watering session? It often bounces back. Busy week at work? Mint keeps growing anyway. Few edible plants are as determined to succeed. And that's exactly what makes it perfect for people who don't have endless hours to spend in the garden. At number 3, we have garlic chives. Most gardeners know about regular chives, but garlic chives deserve far more attention. These hardy perennial plants combine the ease of chives with a mild garlic flavor that works in countless recipes. Once established, garlic chives become one of the most dependable crops in the garden. They emerge year after year, often with little effort from the gardener. That's a huge advantage for busy people. Instead of starting from seed every season, you simply harvest what returns naturally. The plants tolerate heat, cold, and occasional neglect surprisingly well. Their narrow green leaves can be cut repeatedly throughout the growing season, and new growth continues appearing. It's the definition of low maintenance. Another bonus is versatility. Sprinkle them on eggs, add them to soups, mix them into salads, use them as a garnish for almost any savory dish. Because they're harvested leaf by leaf, you only take what you need. The rest keeps growing. Busy gardeners love systems that continue working without constant intervention. Garlic chives are exactly that kind of plant. Plant them once, and they'll reward you for years. At number 2, we have Egyptian walking onions. This may be one of the strangest vegetables on today's list, and it's also one of the smartest choices for busy gardeners. Why? Because it practically plants itself. Instead of producing seeds in the traditional way, Egyptian walking onions develop small bulb clusters at the top of their stalks. As those clusters become heavier, the stalk bends toward the ground. Eventually, the bulbs touch the soil, root themselves, and create new plants. It's almost as if the onion is walking across your garden one step at a time. That's where the name comes from. For busy gardeners, this self-propagating behavior is incredibly valuable. Plant them once, and they often continue multiplying with very little assistance. They tolerate cold weather, require minimal maintenance, and provide edible greens and bulbs throughout the season. Few vegetables offer so much while asking so little. And because most people have never grown them before, they often become one of the most fascinating plants in the entire garden. And finally, at number 1, we have asparagus. If there is one crop that perfectly represents the idea of low-maintenance gardening, this is it. Here's why. Most vegetables require replanting every year. Asparagus doesn't. Once established, an asparagus bed can continue producing harvests for 15 to 20 years, or even longer. Think about that. A single planting can reward you for decades. Now, asparagus does require patience at the beginning. The first few years are spent allowing the plants to establish strong root systems. But after that, the workload drops dramatically while the rewards continue growing. Every spring, tender spears emerge from the soil, almost like clockwork. Harvest season arrives. You collect fresh asparagus. Then the plants grow naturally until the following year. That's a remarkable return on a one-time investment of effort. Busy gardeners understand something important. The best gardens aren't always the ones that require the most work. They're the ones designed to keep producing with the least amount of effort. Asparagus embodies that philosophy better than almost any other edible crop. The truth is that successful gardening isn't about working harder. It's about choosing smarter plants. The right vegetables can forgive mistakes, survive busy schedules, and continue producing food even when life gets hectic. Start with just 1 or 2 crops from this list. Learn what works in your space. Build confidence with easy wins. Because gardening doesn't have to become another full-time job. In fact, some of the most productive gardens are built around plants that practically take care of themselves. And once you discover how much food you can grow with so little effort, you'll start looking at every empty container, raised bed, and sunny corner of your yard a little differently. The goal isn't perfection, it's consistency. And sometimes, the easiest vegetables are the ones that make gardening feel less like work and more like one of the most rewarding habits you'll ever develop.